a young man by the name of Edgar Kaufman Jr. came along. This is him with his parents, E.J. Kaufman and Lillian Kaufman. They owned a department stores in Pittsburgh called Kaufman's, the big store. You see, Edgar Jr. had been off in Europe studying painting, and when he came back, someone gave him a copy of Frank Lloyd Wright's autobiography, and he decided he wanted to study art with this man. And so he came out to Taliesin. Now, some say that in fact they were so wealthy that he's the only apprentice to ever show up at Taliesin with his own personal valet. Either way, they had a little bit of change in their pockets. Now, this was one of those stores where they had lots of employees who would do lots of outside activities together, including vacation. In fact, before the Depression, the Kaufman store owned some property south of Pittsburgh, and they would allow their employees to go down on summer break and take the train down and enjoy the outdoors. There were dorms for boys, for men, and for women, and it was a wonderful time. But because of the stock market crashed, even the few dollars to get down on the train for an all-expense-paid vacation was too much. And so pretty soon it fell out of use. The Kaufmans decided they loved it for a summer residence and bought it from their business, and they wanted to build a summer house. They decided to engage their son's favorite architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright went to the site and he noted the sloping nature of the grounds. He paid special attention to the stream and the rocks that Edgar Kaufman Sr. liked to sun himself on. He surveyed the property that the family thought was perfect for their summer residence. He asked that a topographical map be made and sent along to Taliesin, and he left. When the map arrived at Taliesin, however, he was busy working on another project, something that Edgar Kaufman Sr. had been willing to finance for him, and that was a conceptual idea for Broadacre City, the way that Americans would live in a suburban environment, where everyone would have an acre of land. Well, a couple of months went by, and that topographical map was still rolled up in a corner. The phone rang. It was Edgar Kaufman Sr., E.J. Kaufman. He said, "This is E.J. I'm just wondering how the plans are coming along. I'm going to be in Chicago in just about a week, and then I'm going up to Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and then I'll head over to Spring Green just to let you know." And Frank Lloyd Wright says into the receiver, "Well, come along, my dear E.J. We'll be ready for you." You can imagine how excited this made the apprentices. Finally, the only real commission they had in the whole place was going to be worked on. Mr. Wright was going to pull down these plans, and they were going to see this amazing architect, now almost 70 years old, utilizing his skills. Wright returned the receiver to its cradle, and he turned and walked right past those plans, though, because he was too busy thinking about Broadacre City and how he could use butterfly bridges and flying cars and skyscrapers. A week later, the phone rang again. It was E.J. Kaufman. He was in Chicago. "I'm going to be in Milwaukee tomorrow, and then I'm heading straight out to Spring Green." Frank's sort of crazy response, "Come along, my dear E.J. We'll be ready for you." You can imagine these apprentices thought he was going to work on this a week ago. Well, as he begins to hang up the phone, they think, sure, okay, a day. He's going to be here tomorrow, but that's all right. A day's not enough time to design an entire building, but maybe Mr. Wright can get some ideas down on paper, and it'll be really great. It'll work great. Well, Wright puts the receiver down, and he walks, again, right past those plans, because he's back to Broadacre City, and maybe there'll be a velodrome, and maybe those flying cars will have blades that will stick. He doesn't do anything. You can imagine what those apprentices are thinking when they lay their heads down at night. They're thinking, I don't know how. Why am I working with this man? The next day the phone rings, the apprehension, pins and needles, you can imagine. It's E.J. Kaufman. He's in Milwaukee, and he's headed their way. Frank Lloyd Wright's maddening response, "Come along, my dear E.J. We'll be ready for you." Beaming. Now, every apprentice in that room knows something very important. They know that the trip from Milwaukee to Spring Green takes about 3 hours. 3 hours is not enough time to design a building. It's not enough time to really get the ideas of a building down. It's barely enough time to concoct a reasonable story that you can tell to your father that'll get him not to bash you about your head and shoulders for wasting $600 of his money to study with some washed-up crackpot architect. As Wright cradles the phone for a third maddening time, at least now he asks for the map to be brought to him. The topographical map is brought to his table, and pinned down, a piece of vellum is stretched over top, and Frank goes to work, the only calm in this storm that is swirling around him. The apprentices are working quickly, and Frank Lloyd Wright has two secrets that he now reveals. Number one, that he's the fastest architect that any of them will probably ever see in their life. He is using pencils faster than they can sharpen them, and he is calmly talking through the building as it begins to take shape. Well, here's where EJ and Lillian will have breakfast in the morning, and where Lillian will go enjoy herself in the afternoon, and here's where EJ will sun himself. And as the first floor is finished, they pull a piece of vellum down over top for the second floor, and it's drawn directly over top. The second floor takes shape, and he's not even using his eraser. That's how good he is. And the second secret reveals himself. You see, Frank Lloyd Wright would later say he never sat down at a drafting table until he had designed the entire building right up here, worked out all of the details. You see, from that moment, he had stood next to that stream with the water cascading down. An image of the perfect building had been building in his mind, and he laid it out as the third floor went down. It looked like maybe, just maybe, they'd get floor plans done. The papers were turned to the side, and elevation drawings were pulled off, and then a rudimentary perspective sketch, and literally, seemingly, as Frank Lloyd Wright set the pencil down into the tray, there was heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside, and E.J. Kaufman and his entourage came sweeping into the room, only be greeted by a quiet Cheshire cat grinning Frank Lloyd Wright, who said, "Well, what took you so long, my dear E.J.? We've been waiting for you." The building that Frank Lloyd Wright designed that day changed slightly. The most notable change was the name. It went from being the Kaufman Summer Residence to a more fitting title that Frank Lloyd Wright gave it, the name Falling Water. It's been named the most beautiful building of the 20th century by the American Institute of Architects, perched on 4 of these piers right over the waterfall. It uses that rock that E.J. Kaufman loves sunning himself on as the center of the house. It's nestled into the trees. It becomes part of nature. In fact, it bends around nature in areas. The interior has floors that are built out of river rock and then waxed to feel like you're standing in the middle of the river. And if you really do need to stand in the middle of the river, you can walk down the steps from the living room right into the stream. That iconic image of this house. In 3 hours, Frank Lloyd Wright did something that no one expected. He went from being the greatest architect of the 19th century to a man at almost 70 reinventing his career. He, in 3 hours, was able to turn himself from a has-been architect with no work to a man who would work continuously until he died just short of his 92nd birthday.